So for a game called Asteroids, we're definitely missing at least one really important thing. So yeah, in this video, let's go ahead and add some actual asteroids. This is going to be probably the most complicated video that we've had to date. This is all the programming we're actually going to do on the screen. But if you look closely, there's actually a lot going on here. And we're going to start to use some concepts that we haven't used much yet. The big one being variables. We're actually going to create a couple of variables. And we're going to create a couple of clones. So we're going to start talking about the concept of instantiation. These are two pretty big concepts in computer programming and game design. So of course, before we program the asteroids in our game, we actually need to create the asteroid sprite. So I jumped into Piskel, created a very simple asteroid. It is just a black outline with some brown paint inside. I added some holes to it, and that'll do it. If you really wanted to get fancy, you could actually create several frames where the asteroids were a little bit different, and then you could probably figure out how to use costumes to make it so that they're different looking asteroids on the screen so they're not all quite so uniform. But I'll leave that to you. But given what we've already gone over, that shouldn't be too much of a problem. Once you have the asteroid created, go ahead and export it from Piskel and import it into Scratch like we've done several times already. So here we are back in Scratch. I have my ship sprite, I have my bullet sprite, and now I'm going to go ahead and import my large asteroid sprite. You'll see it pops up on the screen, and the first thing I notice is it's not actually very large. We'll take care of that in a few minutes. So let's go ahead and begin to program this large asteroid. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grab when the flag is clicked, and I am going to, first of all, I am going to hide it, because this asteroid is actually not really the asteroid we're going to be dealing with. This is just going to be sort of a placeholder. What we're going to end up doing is making clones of this asteroid to fly around the screen. But what I need is something to clone. So this asteroid is just going to stay hidden, and it's going to continually make new clones for me. That's called instantiation. So a clone is the exact same as the original. It's going to have all the same properties, and that way we can have several different instances, that's where we get the word instantiation, of one object on the screen at one time. So now what I'm going to do is right away, after it's hidden, I want it straight off to create a clone of itself. So I'm going to grab create clone of myself. So that way there'll be an asteroid on the screen right away. We don't have to wait. Then I'm going to go ahead and grab a forever block. And what I'm going to tell it to do is tell it to wait a certain number of seconds. I think in this case 3 seconds would work just fine. Having asteroids pop out more often than that is going to make it really difficult, but as always you can tweak that to your liking. And after that I'm going to say I want you to create a clone of myself again. So let's take a look at this. When I click the green flag, first thing that happens is the asteroid is hidden. Immediately creates a clone of itself. Then it jumps into the loop. So after it creates a clone of itself, it's going to wait 3 seconds, create another clone of itself. Then it's going to go back and wait 3 seconds, make another clone of itself. But the reason for having this outside the loop is that it'll make one right away, so we don't have to wait for the game to start. I'll press the flag, but nothing's really going to happen. Our ship went back to 0, 0. The asteroid went away. And you might think that nothing's actually happening because I don't see any clones on the screen. That's not actually quite right. It's actually making clones. They're just all hidden. Because remember, these child objects, these instances, are still hidden because they are coming from this main asteroid, which is also hidden. Remember, they get all of the properties from their parent object, so they are still hidden. So right off the bat, I'm creating a bunch of clones, but I can't see them because they're still hidden. So I'm going to grab this other control event that says when I start as a clone. So now I'm going to be giving new instructions to all these clone objects that are being created. And the first thing I could tell it is I want you to actually show yourself. So let's go ahead and press the green flag now. And you might say, okay, well, you made one clone. But actually what's happening here is it's constantly every 3 seconds making a new clone, That's exactly on the same spot as the old clone. So they're just piling up here. I just can't tell because they're all on top of each other. So we need to come up with a way of having the asteroids fly into the screen from different angles and different directions. I don't think it looks right when the asteroids just appear on the screen already, just from nowhere. So I like them to start off the screen and fly onto the screen. So this is where it's going to get a little complicated. I also don't think it looks right when they constantly come from the exact same spot. So we could, for example, say, when I start as a clone, go to X and Y. Well, I said I don't like it when they start on the screen. I know that the screen goes up to 240 in the X direction. So why don't I say, go to X 240, and I'll just say Y of 0. I will say point towards, not the mouse pointer, but point towards Sprite 0, which is my ship. And then I'll grab a quick forever loop and I'll say move 10 steps. And we'll press the flag. Okay, so every 3 seconds, a new asteroid's being created. It's showing itself. It's popping over to the 240 0 spot. It's pointing towards me, and it's moving 10 steps forever. So it comes from the same spot, and it ends at the same spot. When it gets to the side of the screen, it just stops. And this isn't really going to work for me. So we have to find a way to make it so different clones come from different areas of the screen. And that's where it's going to get a little bit complicated. But since we're talking about making things change, I'm going to bring in the concept of a variable. A variable is something that we're going to use when things might change during the game based either on player input or some random value or something like that. So what we're going to end up doing is making a new value. A new variable. So let me stop this. To do that, we're going to go to the data field. And actually, I've already made mine. So let me delete it real quick. I'm going to make a new variable, and this one I'm going to call left or right. And if you really want to be fancy when you do these, they need to be one long word. And you notice I didn't capitalize the first letter, but I capitalized the first letter of the other 2 words that are smushed together. That's called camel case. Think of a camel that has 2 humps in the back like that. So that's how the real programmers would actually do it. This is going to be called left or right. And I'm only actually going to need it for this sprite. It's not going to have anything to do with the ship or the bullet. It's just for the asteroids. So I'll press OK. And I get some new blocks. I can set left or right to a certain value. I can change it, I can show it, or I can hide it. Right now this little checkbox is on. It actually put the value here on the screen. Well, I don't need it on the screen, so I'm going to uncheck that box so I don't actually see it. So here's the game plan. I want the asteroids to be able to come from the left or right side of the screen, the right side or the left side. So you might begin to understand why I called this left or right. So I'm going to go ahead and lose this stuff for now. And so when I start as a clone, I want to set the left or right. But how am I going to have it choose between 0 or 1? One thing is I could have it just go back and forth between 0 and 1. So one would come from the left, one would come from the right. Then it would go back to the left, then it would go back to the right. I don't think that's very interesting either. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my random block. So I want left or right to be set to a random number, but get this, between 1 and 2. So it's randomly going to choose 1 or 2 every single time. It might choose a few 1s in a row. It might go back and forth. It might choose a couple of 1s and a couple of 2s and a couple of 1s. But it will be completely random. And now we're going to do some if statements. But not just a normal if statement. We're going to do an if then else statement. So you think about this. This is how it's going to work. If something happens, I want you to do this. Else, as in if the other thing happens, I want you to do this instead. So we're going to tell this, if the left or right variable is 1, then do this certain thing. If it's going to be 2, then do this other thing. So that's what we have to do. We have to say, I'm going to go to operators, if left or right, the variable, so it just picked 1 or 2, equals 1, then I'm going to have you do something. If it ends up picking 2, it's going to skip over this and do what's down here in the else category. So this is an if then else statement. And the thing that I want to happen is going to be the same or close to the same for both of these. I want to tell it where it's going to go. So if it chooses 1, then I'm going to go to a certain spot. If it chooses 2, it's going to go to some other spot. So here's what I'm going to tell it to do. If it chooses 1, this x value isn't going to change. It's going to be, I'm going to say not 240, I'm going to say 250. That'll give it some, it'll put it a little bit off the screen so we don't see it pop up. But the y value is going to change. It might come from up here sometimes, it might come down from here sometimes. So I'm going to come back and get another random block. So go to x 250 and a random y. So random between, and what are our maximum y values? They go from negative 180 to 180. So if the random number gets selected and it's number 1, then you're going to go to 250 on the x. That's this far over on the x. But you're going to pick between negative 180 down here and 80 up there, some random number. And actually, to make this easier on me, I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this block because the other scenario is the exact same, except for this time the x isn't going to be 250 anymore. That's right, it's going to be over here. It's going to be negative 250. So I know this is a lot, but when it starts as a clone, it shows itself, it picks a value for its variable, either 1 or 2. If it ends up being 1, it's going to go to the right side of the screen over here. Otherwise, if it picks 2, it's going to come to the left side of the screen over here. We're almost there. Now, what I need to do is, regardless, I want it to point, so we're outside of this if-then statement now. So after that, this is going to happen no matter what gets picked. And I want it to point towards the ship. And I want it to move, well, I don't want it to move just 10 steps. I want it to move 10 steps forever. It'll be pointed at me wherever I am when it first gets created. Let's see how we're doing. Okay. All right, so we had a left and then a right, then another right, then another left, and you'll see they're coming from different places each time. We have essentially made it kind of random where they're coming from, but they are being pointed at me wherever I am right when they come into me. Okay, there are a few things I want to go ahead and deal with. First off, I still think they're too small. So before they show themselves, I'm going to go to looks and I'm going to tell them to set their size. I think we should go maybe like 300%, so 3 times what they are right now. I think that looks a little bit better. Another thing that's sort of sticking to me is the fact that they're all traveling at the exact same speed. They're all traveling at this 10 steps speed, and I just think it's kind of boring, kind of uninteresting. So what we're going to do is I'm going to want that to change for every different asteroid. So you guessed it, when we're talking about changing the values of something, we're going to use another variable. So we're going to go down to data. We're going to make a new variable, and let's call it asteroid speed. And once again, this variable is only for the sprite. I don't need the ship sprite to be able to use this variable. So I'm going to click for this sprite only, and I'm going to click OK. Now automatically it put the ship speed up there. I don't need that. I'm going to click off of it. So now up here where I set the left or right variable, I'm going to go ahead and detach that, and we're going to do the same thing. We're going to set, actually I'm just going to duplicate this. Duplicate that, I'm going to change its parameter. I don't want to change the left or right variable. I want to change the asteroid speed variable. And I think for this one, we could probably say between 1 and, let's say, 7. So now, instead of moving 10 steps, I want you to move asteroid speed steps. So when the thing first gets started, it's going to pick a random number between 1 and 7. Then it's going to change the speed based on that. So let's go ahead and turn it back on so we can see it, and press the green flag button. I guess it won't actually show up there for us for some reason, but you have now probably noticed that the asteroids are traveling at different speeds, somewhere between 1 and 7 steps. If I want to make the maximum speed higher, I can change that random value so it goes between 1 and, let's just say, 27. And now there's a chance that when it picks the variable speed, I'll get a very, very fast asteroid, like that one. But that's going to be, once again, completely up to you. That would make the game very difficult. So I'm going to make this between 1 and 7. Okay, the last thing we have to deal with is the fact that the asteroids are getting to the end of the screen and they're just sort of bumping against it. They've got nowhere to go. And we have a couple of options here for how we can actually deal with this. So first, and probably the easier option, we go to motion, and there is this thing that says if on edge bounce, and I'll put that inside the forever, and that's going to be exactly what you think it is. It will make the asteroids bump against the walls and come back at the player. Not very realistic in terms of asteroids flying through space, but if that's something that you think you want to have, then by all means. The other option is to basically reuse the script we have on the ship. I've clicked on the ship sprite, and we had this fun script right here that made it so the ship would teleport when it got to one side of the screen to the other. And so all I need to do is duplicate it. And now I'm going to come over to the large asteroid, and it's kind of hard to tell that's happening, but put your mouse cursor on the asteroid and click. And it goes away because if I click back on large asteroid, I've moved that copy of it to right here. The only thing I'm going to change is that I'm going to move this when flag is clicked to say when I start as a clone. So now, anytime it starts as a clone, as it will every time, just like the ship will, the asteroids will go from one side of the screen to the other. So if you keep your eyes peeled, they're behaving just like the ship would. And you're starting to see that if I don't have a chance to destroy them, they're just going to continue to pile up. Of course, they also can't destroy me. So go ahead and choose the option you like best, and I think next time it's time for us to start blowing some stuff up. So I'll see you then.